5. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very talented special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Sure. My name is Zach Waldman. Thank you so much for having me, Kimberly. I'm a comedy magician based out of Santa Monica, California.
Wow, I cannot wait to dig into my questions. But first questions that I ask everybody is, can you tell me about your extensive history of your past and leading up into your present?
Oh boy. How extended do you want this?
However far you want to go back.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in North Miami, Florida. So I'm a native Floridian. Growing up, all Floridians, we knew that we lived in the weirdest place ever. But now, because of the internet, the whole world knows how weird Florida is, with Florida man making headlines every day. And yeah, so I grew up in North Miami Beach, went to college in Orlando, University of Central Florida. And then I moved to New York City and then to Chicago and then to Santa Monica. I'm running from the law, basically. Don't tell
I
anybody.
read that you're running from the law. They like 10-4, we got them. Can you?
Hey, Santa Monica is where they caught Whitey Bulger.
Who is
Remember,
that? I don't know.
Whitey Bulger was on the run for like decades. He was a mobster that was horrible. He had murdered and tortured all kinds of people. He was a famous mobster, and he was on like the FBI's most wanted list. I think he was number one until Osama bin Laden became number one. But this is a guy that they wanted for years, and they caught him right here, right down the street from me in Santa Monica.
Wow, I know that was very interesting and powerful to know somebody that is most wanted, the number one on the most wanted list. Was he on
Yeah.
America's Most Wanted?
He was everywhere. He was one of the most, famous at-large criminals in the world. Yeah, I never met him. I wished I had, so maybe I could have, blackmailed him. Say, hey, I know who you are. Throw me some of that. Throw me some of that cash before I turn you in. Probably would have just killed me though. Yeah. He was. Yeah, they beat once he got to prison. They beat him to death. Like as soon as he got there.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a bad dude.
Okay. Wow. So I wanted to talk about, like, backtrack a little bit about when you fell in love with magic. Tell me your story.
I think all kids like magic, right? That's kind of common. Everybody gets a magic set when they're a kid. And, but, I guess it's just one of those things. Instead of most kids play with it for a while and it goes into the closet and they forget about it. But for me, I kept going. And my older brother, who's just an amazingly talented jazz and blues sax player, he did magic when he was a kid. And when I got into it, I was always bugging my mom to take me to the magic shop to buy more stuff. And she said, your older brother used to do this. And he was actually able to make money at it. You could get paid to perform shows. And why don't you start working on that? And the money you make, I'll take you to the magic shop and you can buy whatever you want. So in Miami, we had now they everything's politically correct right now, so they call them senior living facilities. When I was a kid, they were just old folks' homes. But in Miami, AKA God's waiting room, I cut my teeth doing kids' birthday parties and old folks' homes when I was a little kid doing magic.
Oh, wow. Tell me, like, the next question is, how was the Howard Stern show and how many years did you do there?
Oh, I wasn't even there a year. I was there, I think, maybe 9 months or so. I used to, I had a real job in radio in Orlando. I worked for an oldies radio station, 100,000-watt FM station. I think at the time, Orlando was probably a top 40 radio market. So it was a big deal that I got this really good job in radio while I was still in college. I started there as an intern and then they hired me. and I became their morning show producer, one of the cast members of the morning show. And then I had my own shift on the weekends as a DJ, and I filled in all of the other day parts. So I would do the morning show and then sometimes fill in for the midday guy or the afternoon guy or the evening guy, whatever. So I was kind of just floating in addition to the morning show and doing production and all of that stuff. And I've been doing magic since I was a little kid. And I started doing stand up while I was in college. And there wasn't really a stand up comedy scene in Orlando. There was basically one open mic a week. And there was, I think, maybe one comedy club in Orlando at the time. And I don't even know how popular it was. Didn't seem like it was a real popular thing. You'd think Orlando, right, with all
Yes.
with Disney and all that other stuff. That I'm sure there's probably a dozen comedy clubs there now. I haven't been to Orlando in years, but at the time there wasn't a lot going on, and so I applied for an internship on the Howard Stern show, thinking, you know what, give me a good excuse to move to New York to pursue stand up. And sure enough, they gave me the internship. So I left a real job in radio where I was getting paid and was doing the morning show to go be an intern on the Howard Stern show. Really, I wanted the experience. I was a Howard Stern sycophant at the time, and, gave me a chance to be on the Howard Stern show, have that fun, and also, start working on stand-up more seriously in a place where I could go to, New York, you could go to 2-3 open mics a day. So as opposed to one a week in Orlando.
What kind of advice do you have for the comedian that wants to do stand-up comedy? Should they be like go around to state, like New York, Orlando, and travel doing stand-up, or create their own podcast? What advice do you have?
Things are so different now. The truth is I could live anywhere. I was telling you before the show started, I was just in Seattle performing for a tech billionaire out there. And then a few days after that, I was in Miami doing a show. And then after that, I was back here and doing a show in Long Beach, and then one in San Diego. And so it kind of doesn't matter where you live once you're working, because the jobs are all over the country, right? That's part of the deal, is you're going to travel and you'll be everywhere. Here's the thing. There's pros and cons. Like when I was in Orlando, just starting out, there was only one open mic a week. And so the downside was there was only one. Another downside was we were all horrible. The guy that ran the open mic, all of the open mic comics, we were all awful. Once in a while, a real comedian would come through town and would do a set, and it was one of the few times you got to see what it was supposed to look like. You're like, oh, that's what a comedian is, because we're all just awful, and so no one's really getting better, right? So that was the downside. The upside was that we all knew each other. That was kind of fun, and you weren't so restricted on time. I mean, they'd give you 10, 15 minutes to go up there. And this particular open mic was at a Comedy Zone in a hotel in Orlando. And so it was like the hotel's bar was also a comedy club. And sometimes we'd actually get an audience. You just never knew. Sometimes you'd come in and there'd be, I don't know, a convention or whatever it was. And you're like, oh my gosh, we got this packed bar of actual audience members. That was cool. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in the right city where there's enough open mics where you can get lots of stage time and there might actually be an audience, that's pretty cool. If you go to Los Angeles, there's a lot of open mics, but there's never an audience. Your audience is the other open micers. And again, you'll get to know each other. It'll be like, oh, these are the same, 15 people that I see at every open mic I go to, and we're all just watching each other's act. And you might only, instead of, I was getting 15 minutes in Orlando, you might get 3 to 5 minutes in LA. And also it's going to cost you money. And, the way it works, I mean, I haven't done an open mic in LA in years, but I have friends that do them, and I, hear through the grapevine what goes on. And, what you might not be aware of is in LA, you pay for these open mics. So you show up at some bar and then you pay them, let's say $5. They put your name in a hat, and then you sit at this open mic watching just horrible comedy. It's hard to even call it comedy, which is what it's supposed to be. It's an open mic. Everybody's awful. I was awful when I was an open micer. I'm not putting them down, but this is what you go through. You sit there and you watch just horrible open mic comedians, and you hope that they pull your name. So let's say this open mic goes on for a couple hours. You could sit there for 2 hours and never get chosen. So you drove in LA traffic, you paid LA parking, you paid $5 for a chance to be pulled up, and instead all you did was watch 2 hours of horrible open micers. I had a buddy of mine who was an open micer at the time, and this happened to him like 3 times in one day, and he was broke at the time. And it's like, man, it's costing me gas money and money at the meters. And he goes, I paid for 3 open mics, didn't get chosen for any of them. So he spent his whole day and night watching horrible open mic comedy and not even getting a chance to go on stage. So whereas the same friend, he's originally from Arizona, and he was telling me, I was visiting family in, I think is he from Phoenix? I think he's from Phoenix. I always forget. No, he's not. He's from, he's not from Phoenix, not from Scottsdale. It doesn't matter. Who cares? I was just bugging me. It was driving me nuts. I'm like, he's one of my best friends. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't remember this. Where's this guy's from? Anyway, he goes there for an open mic, and it's kind of more of what I was talking about in Orlando. There's actually an audience, and there's only 5 of you, and you each get 10, 15 minutes. And so it's a quality versus quantity thing when you're debating where you want to pursue this. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but because you were saying, do you need to, what's the best approach? I don't know, man, just do it. There's so many ways to get there. The most important thing is that you're doing it all the time. Comedy is one of those things. You can read books, you could take classes, you could ask for advice, you could listen to podcasts, but just like Siddhartha learned in the book of the same name, you can, someone can give you knowledge, but they can't give you wisdom. You ever read Siddhartha by any chance?
No, but that is a deep quote, very deep. And I wanted to ask you another question. I'm
sorry, darling. You broke up right there. What did you just say?
I said I wanted to ask you another question, and this question is off script. I wanted to ask you to take me on a journey from when you first started comedy, how you crafted. How did you craft it? I know quality versus quantity. You said you went to open mics that were more 10 to 15 minutes that had more people. So take me on a journey of how you started crafting. Was it because you listened to like awful people, like not awful people, but people that were awful at their craft, and you learned from that? How did you learn and grow and become a great comedian?
So it's funny. I gave you that whole long diatribe about different open mics. The truth is, I didn't really start becoming a real comedian until I moved to New York. So when I moved to New York, which was 1997, the open mic scene was, I think, better then than it is now. It was still rough, but the difference was in Orlando, we were all horrible, and I wasn't seeing good examples of what a good comedian is. When I went to New York, I was now seeing incredible comedians, some of the best comedians in the world performing. So I got to see how it was done. And the other open mic comics that I got to know, we would help each other. I never forgot, I had this one bit. It was one of the first things I did that sort of would get a laugh sometimes when I was an open micer. And a friend of mine said, that one bit you do, because I've just seen a lot of versions of that. Not exactly the same way, but some kind. And he gave me examples. And so it's like if you could unintentionally be hacky because you're not in the community aware of things that are being done often.
Understood.
You
Yes.
know, what so I guess to answer your question, it's what I was kind of getting at was you can read and listen and study as much as you want, but there's no replacement for just doing it. So I started to get good when I could go to 2 and 3 open mics a day every day. And you're just doing it over and over and over. There's just no substitute for experience. There's no way around it. It's the kind of thing you have to do to get better at. No amount of thinking about it or reading about it or studying it. That stuff is good. It helps. But ultimately, you just have to do it a lot. Which is different than like magic, because with magic, you also have to do it a lot to become a great performer. But the one thing you can do as a magician that you can't do as a comic is you can sit around and practice. So if there's sleight of hand that you're working on, you could sit on your couch and do that move thousands of times all day, over and over, until you get good at it. Now, to make it entertaining, then it goes right back to what we're talking about. Then you actually have to get out there and perform it. You need an audience to know whether or not what you're doing is entertaining. But at least the technical side of it, I guess same thing for musicians, right? A musician can practice his instrument all day and night and get the technique down, but he still has to actually go out in front of an audience to learn how to be entertaining with whatever his craft is, with his instrument.
Well said. Was it repetitive for you to have to learn the comedian material? And then we're gonna move on to another subject. Was it repetitive? Did you just read it, practice it in a mirror? How did you do it?
I just kept doing it and I kept trying a lot of different things until I figured out what worked for me. Everybody has a different approach. You know, Jerry Seinfeld is a notorious writer. He sits down and writes. Whereas Brian Regan doesn't write at all. He starts with the premise, goes up on stage, and then works it out on stage. They're both, legendary comedians with completely different approaches. So that's why you just have to figure out what works for you. I never stood in front of a mirror doing stand-up, but magic, for sure. When it comes to magic, you want to make sure things look right. So yeah, all magicians perform in front of mirrors to make sure the technique looks good.
Well said. Who is Kenny Kramer and what made his show or business so powerful? Because I don't know all the stars you've been around. So I'm going to go down the list.
Well, Kenny Kramer is one of my best friends that I've known for many years. And I owe a tremendous amount to Kenny Kramer. Kenny Kramer is the real Kramer. He was the basis for the character on Seinfeld.
No way! Get out of here!
So all the characters on Seinfeld are based on real people. Jerry was actually Jerry. George Costanza is based on Larry David. Elaine's character was the one that was, they always say, I always do this.
Okay.
What is her name? You have to Google the real Elaine. I'm forgetting her name right now. She's a very famous comedian. And although like she's supposed to be the real Elaine, the character of Elaine is more of a combination of people. I think the reason that they say her name will come to me in a second. She's very famous. But she used to date Jerry. And I think that's the reason and I think she might have been a writer on Seinfeld as well. But I think I think she ended up coming out as a lesbian. So she dated Jerry. I don't know if Jerry turned her lesbian or not. But But she so even though like Elaine of the characters, she's the one that's like least based on a specific person. Um, but George Costanza is Larry David, Kramer, Cosmo Kramer was Kenny Kramer, and Jerry was Jerry. And so Kenny was a stand-up comedian himself, and I can give you all kinds of trivia here. I'll give you one little piece of trivia because it's timely. Richard Lewis, one of the great comics, he just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Sorry.
Richard Lewis. You don't know Richard Lewis?
I was like 13 when you moved to New York, so I don't know all of this.
Yeah, but Richard Lewis is a legendary comedian. And you ever watch the show Curb Your Enthusiasm?
No, Zach. Sorry.
So, okay, well, Richard Lewis was on Curb Your Enthusiasm, and he's on this season, which is the last season of that show. And Richard died a couple of weeks ago. I never got to meet him or work with him or anything, but yeah, Richard Lewis, legendary stand-up comedian. And so here's a little side note for Seinfeld trivia-minded people. On Seinfeld, Kramer's name was Cosmo Kramer. And the reason it wasn't Kenny Kramer, which is Kramer's real name, was because Kramer on Seinfeld was not the first time a character on a TV show was based on Kenny. The first time was there was a show called Temporary Insanity about that wacky crew at the temp agency. And Richard Lewis was on that show. And I forget who created that show, but they based Richard Lewis's character on Kramer, and his name was Kenny Kramer. They used his full name. And apparently this show, I think, only lasted an episode before it was canceled. And or maybe more than that, but it was canceled very quickly. And when Larry approached the real Kramer, Kenny Kramer, and said, "We want to base a character on you," Kramer said, "Okay, you could do it, but you've got to call him something else. Don't call him Kenny Kramer," because he was thinking back when his full name was used on this horrible show. It made him cringe. He was like, "I don't want to go through again having my full name on this." And he loved Richard Lewis. It was just a really bad TV show. So, little piece of trivia: Richard Lewis is the first person to portray Kramer on TV. But then the second time around, obviously, Kramer on Seinfeld became iconic. And they wanted to keep the "cuh" sound. So instead of Kenny Kramer, they called him Cosmo Kramer. On the very first episode of Seinfeld, his name is not Kramer, it's Kessler. And because they wanted Kenny to sign a paper giving up all of his rights to his appearance and like in perpetuity. And Kenny was like, "I'm not giving up the rights to my likeness, my name, my image in perpetuity." So Larry and Kenny were best friends. So Larry was like, "All right, instead of calling him Kramer, we'll just call the character Kessler." And it was actually Jerry who said, no, I want Kramer. Let's work it out. And they had the lawyers write it up so that Kenny retained all of his rights. And it was very important that he did that because, like I said, Kenny Kramer was a comedian in the 70s. He opened up for a lot of rock bands and things like that.
He actually looked like Michael Douglas. I just Googled him. He looked like Michael Douglas.
He looked like Frank Zappa. I don't know which picture you're seeing of him, but yeah, I don't know which picture you're looking at, but yeah. And he started a tour in New York called Kramer's Reality Tour. And the first hour of the tour took place in a theater and held about 50 people or so. And Kenny would show them old videos of Larry and Michael Richards, and he would talk about how things in real life became episodes of the show. And this was about an hour long. It was kind of like a stand-up comedy, multi-media presentation that Kenny would deliver in this theater. And then after the hour in the theater, he would take them on a bus and give them a tour of New York City. That was basically a Seinfeld themed tour of New York. He would take them to the real soup Nazi. And, Seinfeld was filmed in LA. All of the establishing shots were in New York. So it was essentially a tour of establishing shots. Like, here's the diner they all eat at. So everybody would get off the bus and stand in front of the famous diner and take a picture.
Wow.
And so anyway, Kenny hired me to help him on the tour. And he knew I was an open mic comic. And so he would let me do audience warm up. So in that first part of the tour that took place in the theater, I would come out, I would do like 5 minutes of comedy, and I would bomb pretty much every time because I was an open micer. I was really bad. And then I would introduce him. He'd come out, he'd entertain for an hour, and then the two of us would hop on the bus, and I would just help him out, like take pictures or whatever for the tourists. And he like gave me great, because he was a successful comedian and he knew all of these great comedians. I mean, he was there in the thick of the comedy boom in the late 70s, early 80s. And so he gave me great advice. And he also paid me way too much for what I was doing for him, which gave me the ability to live in New York, work a couple of hours on Saturday and a couple of hours on Sunday, and the rest of the time do nothing but go to open mics. And so Kenny was just a huge influence on me as a person, and just a huge help in getting my career started and giving me that time to start to develop and get better and not have to have a job. So
Well, I just wanted to say RIP, he died at 76.
No, he didn't. I just talked to him.
Wait,
Kenny Kramer is very much alive.
Richard Lewis. RIP.
Yes.
Richard Lewis.
Oh, that's who you were talking about when you said you looked like Michael Douglas. I was like, what are you talking about? Yes. Richard Lewis, 76. Yeah. Kenny Kramer's totally alive. He's 80.
Sorry about that.
So we just celebrated that. We just did his birthday on Zoom a couple of months ago. So
Kenny Kramer, live in peace. Richard Kramer, RIP. So my next question.
Richard Lewis. Yeah.
My next question is, take me on a journey with being a magician. How do you stand out? How do you stand out?
Well, I think, when magicians ask me for advice, young magicians, which doesn't happen often, but sometimes, I tell them all the same thing. One of the most important things I did was quit magic when I was in college to focus on stand-up comedy, because then I returned to magic after, maybe about a 5-year hiatus of just doing stand-up and then going back to magic, because it taught me how to become a much better performer. If you can entertain an audience with nothing, it becomes much easier when you're doing the same thing, but you also have a trick to show them. Magicians comedy and magic are two very different worlds. There's some similarities. There's a lot of magicians that also employ comedy into their shows.
Is it like ketchup and mustard?
Yeah, kind of.
Whether it just makes a good hot dog or something,
Well, what I mean is I'm talking about as communities. They're very different. So in the stand-up comedy world, if you steal a joke, you're a pariah. That's about the worst thing you could do.
Understood.
In magic, they're all thieves. I mean, I say all. 99% of magicians are thieves. Yeah. On more than one occasion, one of these people was a friend of mine. This girl walks up to me and she goes, "Oh my God, that one joke you do, I've been doing it in my act and it gets such a great response every time." And I go, "Why are you doing my joke?" She's like, "Well, it's a great joke." I'm like, "Yeah, but it's my joke." Mm-hmm. And she kind of laughed it off. I think she thought I was kidding. And I'm like, "Stop it. Stop doing my material. Like, what are you doing?" And they're such thieves that it doesn't even occur to them. Um, you got to realize most magicians don't invent the things they do. I mean, this includes Penn and Teller or David Copperfield.
That was one of my questions about Penn and Teller, but you know who they are. So go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I've known those guys since I was a kid. I love Penn. They're pretty much my favorite, and I love Penn and Teller. So with magicians, there are guys who that's their thing, is they're inventors, they're creators. Some of these guys don't even really perform. To them, magic, what they enjoy is the puzzles, solving this puzzle. Like, how could we make this trick happen, right? And thank God for those guys. And then you've got guys like me or Penn and Teller who take these people's inventions and then make them our own. So kind of like a cover band, right? They're doing some other band's music, but they're making it their own. Now,
do y'all go all the way back to Houdini? Like take some of his, inventions for magic and bring them like with the extra twist on it? Do y'all kind of do that?
Yeah, not just, I mean, it goes back further than Houdini, but yeah, as a matter of fact, Houdini was famous for a trick called metamorphosis, where he would have his assistant, and she would, he would get locked in the trunk, and his assistant would stand on top of the trunk, and then they would be covered up with like a tent, they'd be inside of a tent, and they'd close the door, and then they would open the door of the tent, and they would switch places. And it took several seconds, of the magician's assistant standing on top of the trunk, and then you wouldn't see them for several seconds. Then the curtains would open, and then they would switch places. Well, that trick is still done to this day, and it's been done with all kinds of versions. Probably the most famous version was done by a magic duo called the Pendragons. They're no longer together, but the Pendragons, when they were together, did a version of Metamorphosis that was just, every magician loved it. It was, to this day, it's one of my all-time favorite illusions when they would do it. And it was different because Jonathan Pendragon would be locked inside the trunk. And then Charlotte Pendragon, his assistant, wife at the time, she would stand on top of the trunk. Instead of like a big tent with curtains or anything like that, she would just take this piece of cloth and like hold it up in front of her and drop it. And it was as fast as you could imagine. He would then grab that piece of cloth, and you realized, oh, it's him now. And then she would be in the trunk. You could look it up on YouTube. Type in Pendragon's Metamorphosis, and you could see what I'm talking about. And then there's been versions without any kind of cloth. It might have been Chris Angel that did one where it was just like a big fireball, and they would switch places. Then I saw, and I hate that I'm not remembering their names, but I went to a magic convention. I go every year to this magic convention in Vegas. And last year there was this duo that was like it was a guy and a girl, and it was like a comedy illusion magic thing where they had comedic versions of a lot of illusions you've seen in the past. And that was one of them that they did a very, just a brilliant version of Metamorphosis. I wish I could remember their names. They were fantastic. So yeah, we take tricks that are thousands of years old, and we try to put our own spin on them. And you could do that by maybe changing the props or the presentation, the jokes that go along with it. You could do it serious, or you could make it comedic. For example, Penn and Teller, they do a version of the Cups and Balls, where they tell you the secret and they show it to you using clear cups. And the entertainment comes, it's it's a different reaction because you're entertained by a different aspect of the trick than you would be if you were just watching it. You're entertained by the inner workings of it and the coordination of it. So that's what most magicians do. And I think because most magicians are used to just buying a trick, uh, they feel like jokes are just as disposable to them. They don't understand that when you write an original joke, now they should. Now, by the way, if somebody creates an original piece of magic and they don't market it to sell it, and then some magician sees it and then starts doing it, that's just as bad as stealing a joke.
Yeah.
Because with jokes, people do sell jokes. I've had, comedians say, "Hey, that one joke, I like that. I'll give you. Can I give you $75 for that joke?" And it's like I might go ahead. It's not that integral to my act, but maybe it fits in perfect into a chunk of material he has. So I might sell him that joke. That's fine. Just like if you create a magic trick and you market it and you sell it, then that's different. But magicians are I've never seen more thievery in my life than in the magic community. There are videos you can find online of magicians in other countries stealing acts from magicians here. Example, there'll be like a magician here that goes on, let's say, America's Got Talent with an original act. A magician in some other country you've never heard of, where they also, I don't know if you know this, there's like hundreds of those Got Talent shows. There's Britain's Got Talent, America's Got Talent, but there's also like Poland's Got Talent, Uruguay's Got Talent. You know what I mean? It's like Paraguay's Got Talent. It is like countries you've never heard of got talent. And so some magician out there will copy an act they saw on AGT, the costume, the jokes, the music, beat for beat, do the same exact act presented on one of those Got Talent shows and get praised and go on to the next round. Meanwhile, all the magicians are screaming, "How can you put him through? He stole his entire act." So that's a difference. This all we got on this subject because you asked me advice for magicians. And I guess my two biggest pieces of advice would be, I'll tell you, I'll give you three succinct ones. Mm-hmm. Number one, do something besides magic and learn, whether it's acting or improv or juggling or whatever it is, do something else that requires you to learn to be entertaining outside of magic so that you'll be much more entertaining with your magic. Number two, don't steal. And number three, learn all you can about sales and marketing if you want to make a living doing this. And so there's my advice for you.
Cool. Well said. I wanted to ask you two questions, and they're all together. I wanted to ask you about the magic trick where they cut the lady in half. If you don't want to give the specifics, you don't have to, but they cut a lady in half and spread it apart so it looked like half a lady. I kind of figure out what the trick is. And then the best trick of all that I've seen on Penn and Teller is when they do telepathy, when they can say they read your mind. Can you tell me a little bit more about those? If you can't, it's okay. We'll move on to the next question.
Yeah. So what you're, so the first one with the cutting the lady in half. Here's the truth. There's 50 different ways to do that trick.
Okay.
Sometimes there'll be somebody that comes out and their whole thing is revealing the secrets of magic tricks. There was the masked magician. That was his thing. And even long before the masked magician, there was a guy that put out a videotape that you could rent from your local store, like in the late 70s or early 80s, where he taught you the secrets. But that's just one way of doing it. There's several other ways of accomplishing the same effect. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, if you really, really want the secrets of things, you can go do the research and you can go down that rabbit hole and find out how something works. Um, but the real secret to magic is that the secrets aren't really that important. It's the entertainment value. And that's why I was saying you've got to learn something outside of magic to be entertaining. Because even if people, I know how most things work, but I go to a magic show and I'm wildly entertained, again, because of how it's presented. So the real secret to magic is, making it entertaining, not the actual secret. People say they want to know how things work, but the vast majority of time they don't. They think they do, and then by the time the show is over and they've gone out to dinner and they've gone home, they've already forgotten about it. Some people, I guess it bugs them so much, they go and do the research and they go, that's how it works. And it might not even be correct because, like I said, there's different ways of accomplishing the same thing. There's 50 ways to get a coin inside of a bottle. There's 50 ways to levitate an object, so, and look, and then there's people that will think they figured something out and then they're satisfied with that. They'll see a magician do something and they'll go, that person must have been a plant. Here's a little secret for you. Magicians almost never use any kind of plants in an audience. That's the first thing people think is that person helping them must be in on it. And I could tell you 99.9% of the time, that's not the case. We don't do it that way.
Another question, because we're running out of time. I wanted to know, what is the, like, from the year 2000 to the year 2024, what new inventions for, magic has came out? Like, you don't have to tell me, define how it works, but you said people can create new things. So what inventions has come out that's new, that intrigues you and makes you want to possibly use it for your show? Not the act itself, but the actual invention and the work they put into it.
Something new is invented every day, but it might not be a prop. It might be a sleight of hand move. It might be a new way of concealing a coin in the palm of your hand that no one thought of before. It could be psychological. It could be, hey, you can do this, this, and this, and lead the audience down this path to accomplish this other thing. So sometimes it's mechanical, sometimes it's technological, sometimes it's psychological, sometimes it's physical. So every day there's something. The crazy thing is how much new stuff comes out all the time. For years it wasn't like that, and now it's every day there's something new. And but to answer the second part of your other question, pardon me, you're talking about Penn and Teller, about the mind reading. We call that mentalism. Mentalism, mind reading, it's the same thing. And it's just another aspect of magic. Just like Harry Houdini was an escape artist. Well, it's magic tricks, but specializing in escaping from things. And so mentalism or mind reading, it's just magic tricks, specifically revolving around the idea of finding out what's on somebody's mind or predicting the future, that kind of thing. People really do love mentalism. It's the one area of magic where people still believe it's real. I've done shows because my stage show is a combination of comedy, magic, and mentalism. And I've had people walk up to me and say, "Wow, you are just so extraordinarily gifted. I was wondering if you could help me reach out to this person that's dead, or can you tell me how my best friend I grew up with, can you see her right now and tell me how she's doing? I lost touch with her and I don't even know where she lives." And I'm like, "Well, these are tricks, right? I'm a magician." And they're like, "No, I know that other stuff was a trick, but that when you read my mind, that can't be a trick." Well, yes, it is. And they refuse to believe me. And I've had this happen to many friends of mine too, where you tell them it's a trick. They're going, "It's a trick. I don't have powers." And they just refuse to believe it. They're like, "No, you have a sixth sense. There's something about you." because there's no other way you could have done that. It's like, yeah, there's 50 ways I could have done it. It's a trick. So that is what's interesting about mentalism. It's the one thing people still believe in. You know, nobody believes you're really cutting a woman in half and putting her together. They know that's a trick. Um, they didn't maybe 100 years ago, but now they do. But for some reason, people still believe in mentalism. Hey, then again, you drive down the street, you see all these psychic boutiques that people, I don't know how they do it, man. I see these psychic like palm readers on Sunset Boulevard in LA. I'm like, how many palms are you reading that you can afford the rent on Sunset? You know what I mean? So trust me, there's a lot of morons out there. There's, people that pay for Reiki massages. You know what Reiki is?
I call it Reiki, but what does it define? Define it.
It's where you pay. It's where morons pay grifters money to hold their hands over their body and give them a psychic massage. It's like, hey, look, if I want to pay somebody money to not touch me, I'll just get married. Right? I don't need to do this.
Okay. I have one last question. Well, not one last question, but I'm gonna try to keep it going. Tell me about your experience working with one of the greatest women, Whitney Houston.
So you didn't expect me to be so long-winded, did you?
I love to listen.
I didn't have a lot of interaction with Whitney. I did a show for her, and I got to be honest with you, she was as nutty as you could imagine. I don't know if she was insanely high or just crazy or a combination of both. But it was, I performed for her, and I don't know the guy she was with.
Okay.
And it was just for the two of them. And I'm at their table, and the guy was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. And she was blown away. She was like, you are amazing. This is amazing. She was like just blown away by it. And then I heard her whisper to the guy. It was not much of a whisper. She goes, I'm starting to get scared. Do you think, we could end this kind of thing? And I said, hey, no problem. I said, these are just tricks, but if they're freaking you out, I don't want to freak you out. It's been awesome performing for you. I'll go on to the next group. She's like, thank you so much. She was very sweet. But I think she thought my magic was real. Just like the other person I was talking to you about. She was scared of it. People react to magic weird. It doesn't happen often, but like many years ago, I used to do magic in a restaurant, well, several restaurants. And, you go up to the table after they've ordered and you offer to show them a little magic while they're waiting for their meal. And once in a while, you'd get somebody that would be like, oh, no, your magicians are in league with the devil, or we don't touch playing cards. Playing cards are the devil's playthings, or, we're Christians. We don't like magic. But then I have friends of mine who specialize in ministry magic. They're preachers or rabbis, and they actually incorporate magic into their religious presentations. So you get both sides. You get people who are super religious that think magic is evil and bad and you shouldn't touch playing cards. And then you've got ministers and rabbis who incorporate magic into their presentations. So, but yeah, Whitney, I don't have much else to say about her other than I freaked her out and cut things short with her because she was freaked out by the magic.
In under 1 minute, how did you feel? Just say how you feel, because we have 4 minutes, less than 4 minutes. How did you feel performing for the vice president, Al Gore?
Oh, so, okay. Politics aside, Al Gore is he is so nice to me. I used to perform at this really high-end, same restaurant where I met Whitney Houston at. It's really high-end restaurant in Beverly Hills. And Al Gore, Tipper Gore, who they're not together anymore, but they were married. and their kids all used to come into that restaurant on a fairly regular basis, and they all treated me golden. They were great, great, great family, really nice people, and I got to know them a little bit because they came in quite often. So yeah, really cool.
I gotta ask you one last question. This is the last question before I ask you how to reach you. You got fired from the Howard Stern show. Tell me
Yep.
what you did in under 2 minutes.
Well, the best thing you could do is go on YouTube and type in Zach Waldman Howard Stern, and you'll find you can hear the actual radio segment when I did this, and you can also see a segment from the TV show Extra that they did about me, which is pretty funny. But basically, I took off all my clothes and I ran into the studio naked, ran up to one of the microphones, did a commercial for my brother's nightclub in Hollywood, Florida. Howard kept me on the air naked for 45 minutes, had me escort Luke Perry into the studio naked, and then right at 5 o'clock fired me. And
Wow.
it's crazy. People have done things way worse and not gotten fired, but for some reason they fired me for pulling that stunt.
Well said, and thank you for telling your story, and thank you for coming on my show. How can the people reach you?
Well, I perform all over the country, mostly doing corporate events and really high end private parties. I do a lot of sales meetings, awards galas, things like that. And so, no matter where you are, I even go internationally. Sometimes I might be going to Berlin in September. I'm waiting to hear. But pardon me, I do perform anywhere you want to send me. And the best thing to do is to go to my website, which is my name, ZachWaldman.com. And Zach is spelled Zach, and Waldman is Waldman. So ZachWaldman.com. And then you can fill out a booking request form and see my demo video, all of that stuff. And I'll come out and to wherever you are and do a show. I could do close-up sleight of hand magic. I could do a comedy magic stage show or a combination of the two.
Thank you so much for joining my show. Stay on the line. I'm going to end the stream, and then they're going to end you on the radio. So stay on the line. Thank you, everybody. Give him a round of applause. He's been in the Hollywood scenes for almost 3 to 4 decades. So you take care, Zach. Hold on for a second.
Thank you for having me.